Hello, everybody. This video is on chapter 19, From Crisis to Empire. Let me pull up my PowerPoint now. And when we're talking about crisis to empire, what we're really talking about is the age of American imperialism and the expansion of America. Okay. They give you some historical perspective. American imperialism is coincides with the Second Industrial Revolution, and it lasts all the way up until pretty much you could say World War One. Now, when we're talking about that era, so like the 1890, especially 1898 to 1914, let's go back a little bit. When the U.S. really came on the world stage and said, we're not little guys anymore," and that was the Monroe Doctrine, where we said to Europe, basically stay out of the Americas. The Americas is our turf. If you come over here trying to take over an independent country, we're going to take it as a threat, basically. And in response, actually, European countries went to Asia and Africa as well. But what does imperialism mean? It really means rule of one country by another, an empire. Okay, and the country was divided between imperialist and anti-imperialist, and until imperialists had the edge. And what really was the turning point for America to become an empire was the Spanish-American War. Now, the origins of the Spanish-American War are a couple of things, but Cuba played a big role. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines was part of Spain. Spain was a declining empire. Jose Marti, the Cuban Revolutionary, was trying to organize a rebellion while being exiled here in the United States. They talked about humanitarian concerns, progressives at that time, people who wanted to help others in the country, saw to help others internationally. Then you had the press pushing this selling of newspapers, and war sells. So yellow journalism, the idea of sensationalizing tabloids, that became a big sale for newspapers. So, for example, one of the big newspapermen, Pulitzer and Randolph Hearst, they said, you know what, just give me the pictures, I'll furnish the war. Like I'll make people get so angry that we'll want to go to war, and in turn, I will sell a lot of newspapers. There's also economic interest too. America had $50 million invested in Cuba. If the Cuban Revolution was to succeed and they became independent, that would be more investment. We could control an independent Cuba more than you can control Spain, a Spanish Cuba. There was always imperial interest. I mean, even from the Civil War, there was talks about buying Cuba and turning into a slave colony. So eyes on Cuba have always been there. Let's talk about the triggering events. The last, the Delome letter, for example. The Delome letter, when all this tension was going on, the Spanish ambassador wrote a letter, and the press found out about it and released a letter, and the letter just said, you know what, the president at the time, McKinley, he's weak. They're talking about Cuba. They want to intervene in Cuba. They're not going to do anything. Don't worry about it. Like, there's nothing to fear. Well, in response to that letter, the U.S. sent its warship down to Havana, parked it right there, the USS Maine. Next thing you know, the USS Maine explodes. Okay, and now the yellow journalism came in, and before anybody could say anything, the yellow journalist pretty much said it was torpedoed by the Spanish. Okay, later in investigations found out that there was a fire inside of the ship that caused it to explode. Okay, so the USS Maine became the trigger point to go to war. War lasted 4 months. It saw the emergence of Theodore Roosevelt as a volunteer army captain, and he would go to fight in Cuba and Santiago, and with his group, the Rough Riders. They left out of Tampa. Philippines was also attacked. I mean, it was only 4 months, and then Spain said enough is enough. Let's make a deal. U.S. would end up paying $20 million for the Philippines. Cuba became independent and under the direct control of the United States. Puerto Rico was also annexed by the U.S. So why Cuba and not Puerto Rico? Well, in Cuba, the Jose Marti phenomenon led to the Teller Amendment. And Teller Amendment was made by anti-imperialists. They said, look, we're going to help Jose Marti. We're going to help Cuba become an independent country. And if we take it over, or if we win this war, we're not going to take it over. Whereas the Platt Amendment, after the war, was really kind of like the opposite end. It's like, we should have never made the Teller Amendment. Now we lost the biggest piece of the prize, and now they're going to be an independent country, and we should have taken it over like we're doing to Puerto Rico. So instead, we're going to make another amendment. Okay, fine, you're independent, but we can intervene in Cuban affairs. We could put bases there. That's where Guantanamo Bay is, and you really much we're your big brother, okay? And so everything pretty much has to go through us, and we're going to help you out, but you have kind of like a leash in your independence, okay? Imperialist and anti-imperialist. What was the phenomenon? What were the pros and cons of both sides? Now, for the imperialist side, they said, like, look, we need raw materials for our machines, our factories. We're gonna run out of oil. We gotta go to places to have oil, rubber, so on. Forest, trees and everything like that. New technological capabilities as well. The importance of a naval power, the idea that, like, look, we are as strong as our navy in a global world, and the stronger navy we have, the more we're protected as a country. And for you to have a stronger navy, well, you need to have some territories for them to stop, maybe like some gas stations. And Hawaii would be a great gas station, so would be Puerto Rico. Okay, there was competition with European powers, the idea that if you don't do it, someone else will, and they're doing it, and you don't want to lose an edge to these other countries who are doing the same thing. It was a golden opportunity with Second Industrial Revolution and the new manifest destiny, the idea that maybe it's our destiny to expand outside of our own coast and go take democracy and Christianity to the world, including white man's burden, which meant, listen, we don't want to take over a place like Hawaii or the Philippines, but we have to. We have to civilize them. We have to Americanize them. We have to show them democracy, and we have to show them God too. And so it's a burden for us, but we got to do it. All right. And then there was social Darwinism, which, the strong survive. So, everything is a game in that respects. Okay. The people against saying, like, look, it's immoral, it's against democracy. We became an independent country because we were part of the British Empire. Why should we have the American Empire? And we're taking other people's freedoms away. They're not independent to do their own thing. That's against what we're about. Led to rivalry and armed conflict. Nobody wants to be subjugated, oppressed. You're gonna have to deal with that and the ramifications of the people in those places. Okay, take jobs and reduce wages for Americans. The idea of jobs leaving overseas and factories leaving overseas, and labor was one of those people that were against this. And just progressives in general were against us expanding our empire. Mark Twain says, I am opposed to having the eagle put its talons on any other land. So there you go. Now, the big part of these new territories, Guam, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines, was the Philippines started a war after the Spanish-American War, because the Spanish flag comes down, the U.S. flag comes up, and the people in the Philippines wanting independence were like, nah, we're done. We don't want to be a part of this anymore. And they fought against American forces for, it says 3 years, a little bit longer too. and it was a very bloody war, and very very gruesome. Um, what about Hawaii? Hawaii had its own queen, Lulukalani. Okay, they had their own land. The U.S. was there. Farmers, plantation owners were there, and especially the Dole family, like Dole pineapples, were there, and they got political power enough that they were able to manipulate the politics in the islands to bring about the U.S. Marines. And before any turmoil and tension led to bloodshed, Queen Lulukalani pretty much gave up her throne, and U.S. Annexed Hawaii. They took it over. Okay, St. Guam, Samoa, Midway were also part of the imperialism. Um, the idea Latin America and U.S. should work America, Pan Americanism was also a focus. Puerto Rico becomes a territory. Cuba, Teller, Platt Amendment, Virgin Islands gets purchased. Um, the control of the Philippines and naval bases were all big factor in the Pacific Ocean. What about China? China's like, you know, such a big area, so many people. That's not like a little piece of a puzzle. Everybody had their eye on China. Okay, and there was a lot of money to be made there, and so a lot of countries were already there before we got into the scene. And when we got in the scene as a world power, we basically just said, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna not fight over this land. We're just gonna say it's gonna be a free for all, flea market, basically, where nobody owns anything, and we all have rights to do business here. Nobody's gonna close it off." Against Chinese nationalists who wanted their own country. They basically were getting dictated by European countries, including the United States. This led to a Boxer Rebellion, uh, um, where the Chinese people fought back, but eventually international forces are going to push that down. What else? What about Japan? Japan was Matthew Perry, the naval officer, goes over there with gunboat diplomacy. Basically says, "Listen, we would love to do business with you. We would love to open up and do trade. Um, just know that I got a lot of ships. They got a lot of guns, but we want to be friends." They ended up having to open up, um, and subject to American trade policy. Okay. Um, what else? How do you get from Cuba and Puerto Rico to Hawaii, the Philippines, Japan, and China? The whole goal was to get to China and where the money would be. Okay, that's what this was all about as a business. So you can't go around South America. It's going to take too long. You got to build the canal, which was already starting to get built by the French, but they gave up the project. There's a lot of yellow fever, mosquitoes, plagues, and it was just really, really hard to go through the mountains in that little strip of Panama. Okay, so Theodore Roosevelt at the time makes a deal, right? Panama wants independence from Colombia. Panama was part of Colombia. Colombia owned Panama and Panama Canal, and the U.S. made them a deal to buy that strip of land. Colombia said no, and Theodore Roosevelt basically sided with Panamanian rebels, bribed a couple of Colombian officials. Next thing you know, American ships are close to Panama. Panama declares independence. Colombia doesn't fight back. And now, in return, Panama gives the Panama Canal zone to America to build. Okay. And that was that's how the Panama Canal got built. Roosevelt was a big imperialist, and he's going to go on to push for other things. Like the Monroe Doctrine said no more new colonies in America, but he also added the Roosevelt Corollary. They'd be like, look, if a European country is owed money by Latin American countries, whether it be Dominican Republic, Haiti, Nicaragua, we will be the collector. Okay, basically, we'll pay European countries, and now those countries owe us. All right, and we can have control over them, because if not, and they can't pay their bills, these European countries might be inclined to come over and mess with the Monroe Doctrine, which was to stay out of the Americas. So the big stick policy made it that we are the ones in charge of the Americas. Okay. Next president Taft practiced this dollar diplomacy, then kind of like the other way around. We're gonna lend countries money. They don't pay back. We're gonna have an influence in their country. We're gonna be able to dictate what they can and cannot do. Okay, so it was all part of the idea of imperialism. Wilson's watchful waiting. The next president, Woodrow Wilson, um, he has more of the idea that, you know what, less involvement, but I'm willing to go into countries if I need to, and he goes into Mexico without authorization, searching for a man named Pancho Villa, who was attacking U.S. border towns. And finally, for involvement, Florida is big in this chapter. You have the Cuban immigrants. They go to Tampa first, and create a community called Ybor City. That's where Samadi is. And also in Tampa is where a lot of the troops left to the Spanish-American War. Okay. And you also have Henry Flagler builds the railroad all the way to Key West, because now there's potential trade routes through the Panama Canal. So Florida is really coming up in this time. In fact, Miami becomes a city at this time, 1896. And so anyway, that's the end of this video. So thank you.